we're going to look into the relationship between states and government. What is the state and what are the different theories or approach toward the emergence of the state? And what's government and what's the relationship between government and state? And of course, what's the relationship between state and society is something that you need to fix this session. And what are the different factors that we make in order to classify the government? Government can be classified based on their type, based on the relationship between the legislative and the executive branch of the government, or based on the function, or based on the distribution of power between the central government and the peripheral government. Right? Before proceeding to the classification and definition of government, we need to fix something about the state. What's the state? The term state has not been defined precisely, right? And there is no universal accepted definition of the state. However, for our purpose, state can be defined as a political association that established a sovereign jurisdiction within a defined territorial border and exercise authorities through a set of institutions over all members of the state, society, its people, right? So from this definition, it can be deduced that the state is a collection of institutions, a territorial unit, and it has an ultimate authority and it has its own defined population, right? So the scholars define the state in different ways. And because some of them defined as an institution through which the dynamic of politics are organized and formalized, and some others defined as a network of structured relationship which consists of citizens with their rights and duties, institutions, principles, and power, a political entity with certain observable characteristics, or a state is a vast form of human organizations, or an organized political community of people occupying a defined territory, possessing internal and external sovereignty, and so on and so on. All right. The definition of the state vary as thinkers varies in different time and place. What are the attributes or elements of the state? The state has four essential elements. These are population, territory, government, sovereignty, or independence. The first two elements, namely the population and territory, constitute the physical or the material base of the state, and while the last two elements, namely government and sovereignty, constitute the legal element of the state. The first element, which is population, the state is a human institution, the population is its primary element. There is no hard and fast rule about population, right? The ancient Greek writers like Plato and Aristotle favor a small population. And according to Plato, an ideal state should have a population of around 5,000. And Aristotle laid down a general principle that population of states should be large enough to make it sufficient and small enough to make good government possible, right? It must be remembered that both of them were thinking in terms of small states. Both Aristotle and Plato were thinking in terms of making a small state. In modern times, however, Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French philosopher, prompted by consideration of direct democracy, fixed the number of population around 10,000. So in modern times, states vary greatly from the few thousand of Monaco and San Marino to the big state of China and India. So the modern tendency is in favor of large states. And all that can be said is that the large population is an advantage from the point of view of military defense. However, a large population can be liability, right, if the resources of the state are not adequate for its maintenance. One of the main problems faced by the developing country is overpopulation, isn't it? Thus, there should be a happy balance between the size of the population and the material wealth of the state. Second element or attribute of the state is territory. A definite and more or less permanent territory is also regarded as an essential element of the state. In modern times, cities are bound together by residence on a common territory. Land, water, and airspace comprise the territory of the state. As in population, so in territory, no limit can be laid down. No hard and fast rule as far as what constitutes the territory of a particular state. Small states and large ones exist side by side. We have tiny states like San Marino with an area of less than 25 square miles. On the other hand, there is a gigantic state like Russian Republic, China, United States, Australia with 1 million square miles. According to international law, all states are equal in status and rights, no matter how unequal they are in population and in area. It's claimed that small states are good for efficient administration and inculcating among peoples a sense of unity and love for the state. However, The truth is that a small state is a disadvantage in its relation with a larger one. Small states are adequate the influence of one or another large and powerful states. As said, in favor of large states, they are strong in defense and because of the availability of resources, they are economically self-sufficient. It may be pointed out that the power and security of the states are not determined only by the size of its territories. Some other factors in this regard are geographical location, resource, and climate and so on. Right? The third element or attribute of the states is government. People occupying a definite territory cannot form a state unless they are politically organized, right? That is, unless they possess a government. A government is the political organization of the state. It is a concrete and visible instrument of the state power. According to Garner, political science by the name Garner, government is the agencies through which common policies are determined and by which common affairs are regulated. The state wills and acts through the government. Government must be effective. It must possess the capacity to maintain order and enforce obedience. Without the government, there would be lawlessness and anarchy, and ultimately the state would be dissolved. Right? Government consists of three organs, namely the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary branch of the government. The legislature makes law, the executive enforces law, while the judiciary adjudicates and arbitrates cases or disputes. And there are different kinds of government in different states, such as monarchy, democracy, and dictatorship. And most of the developed states are democracies. Many developing countries, including India, and most of African countries have democratic undemocratic government. Whatever may be the form of government, one thing is clear: there can be no state without government. The fourth element of the state is sovereignty. By far, the most important characteristic of the state is its sovereignty. And the characteristics which distinguish the state from all other association. It denotes the supreme power or the final authority from which there is no appeal. Sovereignty has two aspects: internal and external. Internal sovereignty is the state has the supreme power over all individual in association with its fixed area. It can compel obedience of its people to its laws and commands. And where external sovereignty is freedom from control of any foreign state or allied rule. Before independence, for example, India was not a state as it was ruled by the British. Right? Similarly, the Indian Federation consists of many constituent units called states, but they are really not states in the eye of international law. They are not sovereign. In the same vein, the United States is not a state as it is not sovereign. It should be noted, however, that absolute sovereignty is a legal concept. In actual practice, no state is able to exercise unlimited power either over individual and association within its territorial domain or in its international relation. A state respects and abides by international law, by international treaties, and by the international policies of the international organization like the United Nations and its agencies. A number of writers who have attacked the concepts of absolute sovereignty on a theoretical ground also hold that it is undesirable, like a writer like Lasky, for example, regarded compatible with the interest of humanity in world peace. The fifth, which is not as essential as the first four, is element of the state is the international recognition. In modern time, relations among nations have grown. Many international organizations and institutions have come into being. Therefore, some scholars have argued that international recognition would be an essential element of the state. The recognition of the sovereign status of a new state by other states is called international recognition. According to famous jurist Oppenheim, a state is and becomes an international person, right, by recognition only and exclusively. But there is no agreement on how many countries would have to recognize a new state so that the latter gains status in the eye of international community. Recognition also a political dimension. China was already in a full-fledged state of many years before the United States, established in 1945. China came under the Communist rule in 1949. Communist China was not recognized by the US for Cold War, and so Communist China, though ruling the mainland China was not allowed to become the member of the United Nations due to American opposition. Communist China took its legitimate place in the United Nations in the 1970s only after the establishment of the reapproachment between the United States and the Communist China. It needs to be emphasized that even when the Communist China was not a member of the United Nations, it was very much a state. Absolute sovereignty is not visible. Right? A state needs to be abide by the international law, otherwise there would be international anarchy causing serious threats to international peace and security. Lasky has, rightly argued that ultimate unlimited sovereignty is a threat to world peace and harmony. So, from the above, we can conclude that the state consists of at least four fundamental elements or attributes, namely population, sovereignty, territory, and government. A nation or a state ceases to exist if any one of these fundamental elements stop to exist, especially for a long period of time. Population and territory constitute the physical base of the state, while the government and sovereignty constitute its legal or political base. Now, let's explore the relationship between state and society first, and then the relationship between states and government. The main difference between states and society are first, uh, society is defined as a collection of individuals held together by certain enduring relationship in a pursuit of common end. Right? The state, on the other hand, is a particular portion of the society. It's a particular portion of the society um, politically organized for protection and promotion of its common interest. Therefore, the state is part of the society. The state is necessarily a political organization, but society is not. Secondly, the society regulates all forms of social conduct, and whereas the state regulates only the external relation of men in society. Right? While the state derives its strength mainly from laws, society derives its strength from traditions, custom, and conversations. And thirdly, the state possesses the power of coercion. Disobedience to its law is followed by punishment. Society, on the other hand, does not possess the power of coercion. Disobedience to its rule may not be possessed by any physical punishment, since the only base of authority of the society is social customs, convention, and morality. Society secures the cooperation of its members by persuasion, not by coercion. The state alone possesses sovereignty. The fourth difference between states and society is the state is a territorial organization. It has well-defined territory of its own, but society is not limited to any geographical area. For example, the Jewish constitute a society, they are spread all over the world. So the case with the Hindu society or the Christian or the Islam or whatever society. It has no territorial jurisdiction as the state always has. Its scope may over the entire world, crossing the border of various nations within a state. The people may be organized into different societies having different social traditions. This society may be narrower or broader than the state. The fifth is that the state is a compulsory organization, whereas society is a voluntary organization. And in spite of the above difference, the state and society have some common features as well. The state and society sometimes include practically the same person, and in most cases, an overwhelming majority of the members of the society may be included in the same state. Hence, the state and society go hand in hand. They help each other. Progress of society depends upon the progress of the state, and the working of the state is influenced by the social custom and traditions. So we can sum up the distinction between the state and society in the following words. The state and society overlap, they blend, they borrow from one another, but roughly we may say that the area of one is voluntary cooperation, its energy that of goodwill, its method that of elasticity, while the area of the other is that of the mechanical action, its energy, force, its method, and rigidity. Now, let's look into the relationship between state and government. Some of the main differences between state and government are as follows. First, government is only an element of the state. A state has four essential elements, as we have already discussed, namely the population, territory, government, and sovereignty. And government is only one element of the state. It is just one part of the state, acts for the state. And whereas government is an agency or agent of the state. Government is an agency of the state. It acts for the state. It is that agency of the state which formulates the will of the state into laws, implements the laws of the state, and ensures conformity to the law of the state. And government exercises power and authority on behalf of the state. Plus, state is abstract, whereas government is concrete. State is a concept, an idea, or a name used to denote the community of a person living on a definite territory and organized for the exercise of sovereignty. A state cannot be seen. Government is made by the people of the state. It's formed by the representative of the people. It has definite and defined organization and form. It can be seen as a team of people exercising the power of the state. Plus, government is organized only by a portion of the population of a state. The whole population is part of the state. All the people are citizens of the state, however, government is made by the representative of the people. Only some people who get elected act as representative of the people, form the government of the state. Their number is limited to a few hundred only, right? Whereas the state, membership of state is compulsory but not of government, and all people are citizens of the state. They together constitute the population of the state. If one normally get the membership of a state automatically right at the time of one's birth and continue to live life as such. However, membership of the government is not automatic. No one can be forced to become its part. Anyone can voluntarily seek an election, get elected as a representative of the people, and become part of the government. Only some persons form the government. Sovereignty belongs to the state and not the government. Sovereignty is a hallmark of the state. It belongs to the state. That the government exercises power on behalf of the state. It acts on the basis of the sovereignty of the state. Sovereignty is comprehensive, absolute, unlimited, and all-inclusive supreme power of the state. The government exercises only well-defined and limited power. Territory belongs to the state. The state has sovereign ownership and jurisdiction over its territory. State is a territorial entity and territory belongs to it. The government has the responsibility to preserve, protect, and defend the territory of the state. The law made by the governments are applicable to all parts of the territory of the state, but territory belongs to the state and not to the government. Right? The last point is every state has uniformly four essential elements. However, the forms and features of the government differ from state to the state. Right? What does that mean? Each state has a uniform personality with its four essential elements: the population, territory, government, and sovereignty. However, government can be of different forms: parliamentary or presidential, unitary or federal, or a mixture of these. Right? A government can be monarchical or aristocratic, or democratic or dictatorship. The people can be change the form of the government, but the state exists independently and has a uniform character. In this section, we will look into the theories or approach on the emergence of the state. And we will also assess the strengths and weakness of those approach or theories. The first theory, as far as the emergence of the states is concerned, is the divine origin theory. The second, in the chronological order, the patriarchal theory of the state. The third is the matriarchal theory. The fourth is the force theory. And the fifth is social contract theory. The sixth is the Marxist theory of the origin of the state. Now let's explore each of them, their weak and strong sides as well. The first, as I've told you, is the divine origin theory, the earliest in the ancient approach towards the emergence of the state. The general genesis of the divine origin of the state is just nothing but it is an exponent of this theory. I believe that the state didn't come into being by any fault of man. It's created by God. The oldest theory about the origin of the state is the divine origin theory. It's also called the theory of the divine right of kings. The king who rules over the state is an agent of God on earth. The king derives his authority from God for all his action. He is responsible to God alone. Obedience to the king is considered to be obedience to God. A violation of that will be a sin. The king is above the law and no subject has any right to question his authority or his action. The king is responsible to God alone. The conception of the divine creation of the state may be traced back to the remote antiquity. It was the universal belief with the ancient people that the king is representative of God on earth and the state is the belief of God. That the king had both political and religious entity. In religious books also the state is said to be created by God. In some religious conception this thing is explicit, but in other it is implicit. The divine origin of the state is gleaned first in the Old Testament of the Bible. There we find, let every soul be subjected unto the highest power, for there is no power but God. The power that be are ordained by God. Whosoever resists the power resisted the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Plus, in 1680, Sir Robert Filmer wrote a book entitled The Law of Free Monarchies, in which it is stated that Adam was the first king on earth, and the king subsequent to him are descendants of Adam. This theory prevailed in the Old Age when the religion and politics were combined in the person of the king. In the medieval period, the Christian held the Pope in semi-god status, and the Muslim ordered the Caliph with the priest king. The Dalai Lama was the head of the theocratic state of Tibet. He was considered there as the incarnation of the Buddhist god. Both the church and the state in their mutual rivalry used the theory of the divine origin in the medieval age. The church asserted the supremacy of the church over the state. On the other hand, the state, because of its divine nature, emphasized on its supremacy over the church. The Stuart King James claimed that he derived his authority directly from God. According to him, the king is wise, intelligent, but his subjects are wicked. Even if the king is bad, the people have no right to rebel against him. Even in the 9th century, the king of Austria, Prussia, Russia formed the Holy Alliance under the notion that they were appointed by God to rule over the people. Anyway, the European kings took shelter under the divine origin theory in order to justify the dictatorship. But that, as it may be, during a large part of human history, the state was viewed as a direct divine creation and theoretic in nature. The nature was in currency so long as religion was considered to be the chief motive force of all human activity. In the 10th century, this theory came under criticism, being an incorrect explanation of the origin of the state. With the growth of scientific outlook, this theory faded into oblivion. Today, trend is that the state is a historical growth. We shall now discuss the cause of the decline of the theory. Cause of the decline of the divine theory. In the first place, when a more acceptable theory like the social contract theory came out, the divine theory was dashed into the ground. The new theory suggests that the state is a handiwork of man, not the grace of God. In the second place, the Reformation that separates the church from the state debased the coin of the divine theory. The post-Reformation period is a period of non-religious politics. The secular outlook made the divine theory totally unacceptable. In the third place, the emergence of democracy. The emergence of democracy was a big blow for the autocratic dogma of the mixing religion with the politics, and thereby it blunted the age of identifying God with king. Democracy not only glorified the individual, but shattered the divine halo around the origin of the state. Last but not the least was the growth of scientific inquiry and materialistic view of the political mechanism. The result was that the previous blind faith and superstition was no longer acceptable. The people began to accept only those things that stood the test of logic and reasoning. Criticisms of the divine origin of the state. There are several lines of argument in the hand of the leveled against the divine origin of the state. The first line of argument is that the state is a human institution organized in associations through human agency. Modern political thinker cannot accept this view that God had anything to do with the creation of the state. In other words, It does not stand the common sense of the modern that could select anybody to rule over the state. The second line of argument is that the divine theory is fraught with dangerous consequences because a semi-divine king is bound to rule arbitrarily, as he is responsible only to God and not bound to his public opinion. Such a theory will make a ruler despotic and autocratic. The third line of argument is that the divine theory is unrealistic because the bad ruler will continue to rule under the divine shield. There are some bad rulers like James II of England and Louis XV of France who were replaced by the people. This could not happen if the divine theory was to be accepted. The fourth line of argument is that the New Testament of the Bible reverts the divine conception of the state as ingrained in the Old Testament. It emphatically states in the New Testament, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's," which gives the state human character as against the divine ethic. The fifth line of argument is that the divine theory is unscientific. The anthropologists and sociologists, after careful scientific analysis, have discovered the theory as totally untenable explanation of the origin of the state. The sixth line of argument is that the divine theory runs counter to the universally accepted conception that the state is the result of historical evolution. The generally accepted theory of the origin of the state is that various factors like religion, family, force, and political consciousness were behind the growth of the state. The seventh line of argument is that the divine theory is undemocratic. The inevitable implication of the theory in content and tone will make the king absolute and his government never democratic. So, the theme of the theory is against the spirit of democracy. So, at an origin of the state, the divine theory is no longer alive. It's the defunct dogma. The emergence of the social contract theory, which holds a wish of the people in high, also dwarfed the glory wishes in the creation of the state. When human activity was considered the motive force and state, the divine one receded to the background and finally vanished away. The important role assigned to the man in the creation of the state by the social contract theory shattered all hope of divine right theory. The second factor in the decline of the divine right theory was the Reformation movement in the 16th century Europe, in which curbed the authority of the Pope and the Church, at the same time brought the monarch and the people in the limelight. The scientific and logical thinking associated with the Renaissance and Reformation enabled the man to look into the theory of the origin of the state as something which must be created by non-church and non-God bodies. With the decline of the authority of religion, it declined the divine authority. So the final nail of the coffin of the divine theory with the modern theory that democracy will of the people with the basis of the state. But something must be remembered here. It has a value, even though it suffers from many limitations. The divine origin of the state also has its own value. Although the divine theory is totally discredited as an origin of the state, there are some goals in it. The summum bonum, or the best thing of the theory, is that it stimulated the law abidingness among the subject, right? At a time when these were the need of the hour in those anarchical conditions. This theory also created the moral responsibility of the ruler because they were cast with the divine injection to rule to the perfect satisfaction of the heaven. Second approach or theory towards the emergence of the state is the patriarchal theory of the state. The principal exponent of this theory is Sir Henry May. According to him, a city is a conglomeration of several families which developed under the control and authority of the eldest male member of the family. In other words, the head or the father of the patriarchal family wielded great power and influence upon the other member of the family. His order was carried out in the household. This patriarchal family was the most ancient organized social institution in the primitive society. Through the process of marriage, the families began to expand and they gave birth to Gen, right? And which stand for the household, and several gens made one clan, and a group of clans constituted a tribe, and a confederation of various tribes based on blood relation for the purpose of defending themselves against the aggressor formed one commonwealth, which also called state. St. Henry Remaining analysis of the growth of the state is the elementary group is the family connected by the common subjection to the highest male ascendant. The aggregation of the families form the gens or the household. The aggregation of the house makes the tribe, and the aggregation of the tribe constitutes the state. So the foundation of the state was caused by three factors, namely male kinship, permanent marriage, and paternal authority. The silent feature of the patriarchal theory is that the families grow through the descendant of the father, not the mother. The male child carried on the population through the marriage with one or several women because both monogamy and polygamy were the order of the day. The eldest male child had a prominent role in the house. But it also this theory also suffers from certain limitation and it faces certain criticism. The patriarchal theory at the origin of the state is subject to the following criticism. The first place, the origin of the state is due to several factors like family, religion, force, political necessity, etc. So by identifying the origin of the state with the family, one makes the same fallacy as taking one cause instead of several causes. So human society is built up by a complexity of causes, not just simply household. In second place, the theory is incorrect because in the opinion of several critics, the primary social unit was the matriarchal family rather than a patriarchal family. So the matriarchal family and the polyandry were the base of the state. The kingship through the female line in the primitive society was responsible for the growth of the state. The process was that polyandry resulted into matriarchal society and the matriarchal society led to the state. In the third place, oversimplicity that the theory has to be rejected as untenable and the authority of the father over the children is only temporary. Because his authority ends when the children grows in age, but authority of the state over the population is perpetual. The third approach towards the emergence of the state is the matriarchal theory of the origin of the state. The chief exponents of the matriarchal theories are Morgan, McLennan, and Edward Jenks. And according to them, there was never any patriarchal family in the primitive society, and that the patriarchal family came into existence only when the institution of permanent marriage was in effect or entrained. But among the primitive society, instead of permanent marriage, there was sort of sex anarchy. Under that condition, the mother rather than the father was the head of the family. The kinship was established through the mother. The matriarchal theory of the state is very old. There are many people who support this theory. There was a time in human history when there was no system of permanent marriage and family. At that time, people were still in the hunting stage of human civilization. People lived in a group and the life was dependent on the fruit and hunting animals. When two groups were made, there would be union between man and woman. After this, the group separated. Children born as a result of this union and didn't know their father. So all relationship and descendant were traced through the mother. At this stage, people were still leading a nomadic life, so there was no concept of the private property. And this was population increased, and finally, people got settled and radical change took place. As a result of which, matriarchal society changed into a patriarchal society, and the state was born. But also, this approach, this theory also suffers from certain criticism. Let's explore the critics. The matriarchal theory is attacked on the following ground. First, the state was created by several factors, of which the family was one. Though this theory makes only a patriarchal study of the origin of the state, force, religion, politics, family, contract were all there to contribute to the growth of the state. Secondly, like the patriarchal theory, matriarchal theory also mistakenly analyzed the origin of the family and the origin of the state. The state is something more than expanded family. They are quite different in essence, organization, function, and purpose. Certainly, the theory is historically false because it's not a fact of history that the matriarchal system was the only system at the patriarchal time. Another early theory of the origin of the state is the theory of force. The exponents of this theory hold that war and aggression by some powerful tribe were the principal factor in the creation of the state. They rely on the oft-quoted saying that war begot king, the historical explanation of the origin of the state. Force or might prevailed over the right in the primitive society. A man physically stronger established his authority over the less stronger person. The stronger person in a tribe is therefore made a chief or a leader of the tribe. After establishing the state, by subjugating the other people in the place, and chief used authority in maintaining law and order and defending the state from the aggressors from outside. This force was responsible not only for the origin of the state but for the development of the state also. History supports the force theory at the origin of the state. Historically speaking, there is not the slightest difficulty in providing that all political communities of the modern type owe their existence to successful warfare. As the state increased in the population and size, there was a concomitant improvement in the art of warfare. The small states fought among themselves, and successful ones made big states. The kingdoms of Norway, Sweden, Denmark are historical examples of the creation of the state by the use of force, and the same process of Spain emerged as the new state in the 6th century AD. In the 9th century, after the days of Christ, the Normans conquered, established the state of Russia. The same is true about the creation of modern Ethiopia during the second half of the 19th century. The beginning of the states are to be sought in the capture and enslavement of man by man, the conquest and subjugation acquired by superior physical force. The progressive growth from tribe to kingdom and from kingdom to empire is but a continuation from the same process. The force theory is based on the well-accepted maxim of the survival of the fittest. There is always a natural struggle for the existence by fighting all adversaries among the animal world. This analogy may be stretched to cover the human being. Secondly, by emphasizing the spiritual aspect of the church, the clergyman condemned the authority of the state as one of the brute force. This indirectly lends credence to the theory of force as the original factor in the creation of the state. Certainly, the socialist also condemning the coercive power of the state as one bent upon curbing the exploiting the workers, admit of force at the base of the state. Lastly, the theory of force is supported by the German philosophers like Friedrich Engels and Immanuel Kant. They maintain that war and force are the deciding factor in the creation of the state. Today, state is power. It is a sin for the state to be weak. That state is the public place of offense and defense. The grandeur of history lies in the perpetual conflicts of nations, and the appeal to arms will be valid until the end of history. According to Bernardet, might is the supreme right, and the dispute as to what is right is decided by the arbitrament of war. War gives a biological just decision since its decision rests on the very nature of things. But it also suffers from certain criticisms. Let's explore the argument from the critic. In the first place, the element of force is not the only factor. The element of force is not only factor in the origin of the state. Religion, politics, family, the process of evolution are behind the foundation of the state. Just to say that force is the origin of the state is to commit the same fallacy that one of the causes is responsible for the thing while all the causes were at work for it. The theory is in magnifying what has been only one factor in the evolution of the society into some controlling force. A state may be created by force temporarily, but to perpetuate is something more essential. In second place, the theory of force ran counter to the universal accepted maxim that will not force is the base of the state. No state can be permanent by blood and iron. It must have the general voluntary acceptance by the people. In the third place, the theory of force is inconsistent with individual liberty. The moment one accepts that the base of the state is force, how can one expect liberty there? The theory of force may be temporarily the order of the day, and despotism against democracy. In the fourth place, the doctrine of the survival of the fittest, which is relied upon champion of force theory as erroneously applied a system that is applicable to the animal world than to the human world. If force was the determining factor they maintained, how could Mahatma Gandhi non-violence triumph over the brute force of the British imperialists? That's a question which we cannot get a direct answer to it. Lastly, the force theory is to be discarded because political consciousness rather than force is the origin of the state. Without political consciousness of the people, the state cannot be created. This is so because man is by nature a political animal. It's a political conscience that lay deep in the foundation of the state. We may conclude, therefore, state, government, and indeed all institutions are all the result of man's consciousness, the creation of which have arisen from his appreciation of a moral end. But it has its own value. The fourth theory has its own value as far as the explanation and understanding of the emergence of the state. The theory force, although untenable as an explanation of the origin of the state, has some redeeming feature. First, the theory contains truths in that some states at a certain point of time were definitely created by force or brought to existence by the show of force. When the Aryans came to India, they carried with them weapons of all kinds and horses to use in war against the non-Aryans, and by defeating the non-Aryans, they carved out a kingdom in India. Later on, Aryans spoiled the kingdom and broad-based the government and ruled with the backing of the people. Secondly, there is a silver lining of the theory that it made the state conscious of building adequate defense and army to protect the territorial integrity of the state. That's why we find commander of war and brigadiers as an important post in the ancient kingdom. In the modern state, we find a substantial amount of money and used on defense budgets. Every state in the modern world has got a defense minister which unmistakably recognizes the use of force in modern state crafts. The fifth approach towards the emergence of the states is social contract approach, social contract theory. The most famous theory with regard to the origin of the state is the social contract theory. The theory goes to tell that the state came into existence out of the contract between the people and the sovereign at some point of time. According to this theory, there were two divisions in human history. One period is prior to the establishment of the state, called the state of nature, and the other period is subsequent to the foundation of the state, called the civil society. The state of nature was a birth of society, free of society, government and political authority. There was no law to regulate the relation of the people and the state of nature. There were three exponents of this theory, and they were Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who differed about the life in the state of nature, a reason for converting the state of nature to civil society, and the term of the contract. They all, however, agreed that the stage came into history of man when the state of nature was exchanged with civil society to lead a regulated life under political authority. The net result of this changeover was that the people gained security of life and property and social security, but lost the natural liberty which they had been enjoying in the state of nature. The crux of the social contract theory is that men create government for the purpose of securing their pre-existing natural right, that the right came first, that the government is created to protect these rights. These ideas were based on the concept of the state of nature, natural law and natural right. According to Thomas Hobbes, life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. But John Locke argued that if in the state of nature there were a law governing conduct, there was the natural law, comprising the universal unvarying principle of right and wrong, known to men through the use of reason. Thus, John Locke would have us believe that if an Englishman was to meet a Frenchman on an uninhabited and ungoverned island, he would not be free to deprive the Frenchman of his life, liberty, and property. Otherwise, he would violate the natural law, and hence was liable to punishment. Thus, according to John Locke, the state of nature was not lawless condition, but was inconvenient condition. It was inconvenient condition. Each man had to protect his own rights, and there was no agreed upon judge to settle dispute about the application of the natural law to particular controversies. Realizing this, men decided to make a compact with one another in which it would give to the community the right to create the government equipped to enforce the natural law. And this way, every man agreed to abide by the decision made by the majority and to comply with the laws enacted by the people's representative, provided they didn't encroach upon his fundamental rights. In this way, the power of the ruler was curtailed. The doctrine of the social contract is faintly mentioned in the ancient period by both the Western and Eastern philosophers. Plato was the first among the Western thinkers to use the term social contract. It's admitted that all hands that the two English political thinkers, namely Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, as well as the French political thinker Jean-Jacques Rousseau, gave the concrete shape to this theory. So this trial is considered as the godfather of social contract theory, the theory of the foundation of the state were laid down the great work on the social contract, particularly the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes and John Locke in the 19th century, and the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century. The background of their theories was the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation, which had shaken the fundamental constitution of the European Christendom, had broken up the divinely sanctioned contractual relation. The Holy Roman Empire was, torn apart by the War of the Reformation. Under these circumstances, there was a need to search for a new base for order and stability, loyalty and obedience. The result was that the secondary theorist, the secular theorists of social contract, and they discarded the old idea that God chose his subject. And the new theory suggests that it was the people who, through their representatives, succeeded in choosing their ruler and the method of government by means of social contract or construction. Social contract theories suggest that the political units were established by means of promise. The three proponents of the theory interpreted the theory in their own way. Let's explore the three proponents of the social contract theory. The first proponent is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, in his book The Leviathan, he delineates, he explicitly states very precisely, straightforwardly, the creation of the state by agreement. To begin with, before the state was created, there was a state of nature in which a war was raging. There was no law or justice. Human life was marked by force and deceit. And Might was right in that situation. Hobbes gave a gloomy picture of the state of nature in his oft-quoted words: life is solitary, poor, nasty, and brutish. The people became fed up with the state of nature. In order to get rid of the unbearable condition, they entered into an agreement by which they established a government or authority to which they surrendered all their right. The surrender was unconditional and irrevocable. The authority was a single person or a group of persons ended with unlimited power. The authority to rule was the result of the contract. Since he was not a party to a contract, he was not bound by the term of the agreement. The people had no right to depose the ruler or to agitate against the ruler. If the people revolted against authority, they would be guilty of violation of the contract and would face the consequence of going back to the state of nature. In Hobbes' view, there was one single contract in the creation of the state and establishment of the government. From that, it would follow that if the state was gone with the government, it's apparent that Hobbes was supporting legal sovereignty and had no room for political sovereignty. Disgusted with the useless dispute between the monarch and the parliament in England, he supported the despotism, so he gave all power to the sovereign. Thomas Hobbes called his state the Leviathan, which came to existence when its individuals members renounced their power to exercise the law of nature, which was one of each for himself, and at the same time they promised to turn this power over to the sovereign who was created as a result of his promise, and also to obey the thenceforth laws made by his sovereign. The second approach to social contract theory is John Locke's theory of social contract. In his book, The Treatise on Civil Government, John Locke justified the limited monarchy. He didn't agree that the state of nature was a gloomy and dismal one as painted by Thomas Hobbes in contrast. Locke's state of nature was one of the peace, reason, and goodwill. Yet, however, this semi-paradise could not satisfy the people because they were longing for law and impartial authority. So they abandoned the state of nature, though for a different reason. So in replacing the state of nature, the people created the civil society by contract. They made another contract by which government in person of the king was set up. Here the ruler was a party to the contract. The people would obey him so long as he would protect the life and the property. The people's surrender of right was partial and conditional. If the people would violate the contract, the people would be entitled to depose the worthless king. Thus, John Locke supported the glorious revolution of the 1688. His sovereign was political rather than legal, as propounded by Thomas Hobbes. He was clear in distinguishing the government from the states, which Hobbes failed to do, while Hobbes destroyed individual liberty. Locke destroyed the absolute authority of the state. When Thomas Hobbes took brief For real, absolutism England was getting disgusted with the meaningless fights between the king and the parliament during the Stuart period. Log timing was related to the period when the king was maintaining a low profit and parliament was in ascendance. This would culminate in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. John Locke viewed with that the individual promised to accept the judgment of common judge, that is the legislature, when they agreed to accord, which established civil society. Subsequent generation, by ascending to the term of the compact, accept the inheritance of the private property which was created and guaranteed by the compact. If any individual would disobey the constitution, he must leave the territory of the political unit and go into empty places. The indication was that the disloyal people might take shelter in America, which was an empty place at the time. The third approach towards social contract theory is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's approach to the social contract theory. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the third play of the game of social contract theory, struck a middle course between the two English counterparts, John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. His book Social Contract, published in 1762, reconciled the authority of the state and liberty of the individual. In a state of nature, human lives were free, healthy, honest, and happy, according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But there was a debasement and degradation with the increase of population and with the progress of civilization, particularly with the emergence of private property in land, which destroyed the natural equality among men. To get out of this maniacal position may enter into an argument with the pledge each of us put his own person and all his powers in common under supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole. So, unlike Hobbes and Locke, the authority created was not given to the ruler, but was retained by the whole community, Underline that. As a matter of fact, the whole community expressed the general will in public meetings. Subsequently, the government was created by a legislative measure. The people delegate powers to the government. Rousseau's theory hallmark is the concept generalizing the concept of the general will. Jean-Jacques Rousseau stood for the popular sovereignty as against local sovereignty. Thomas Hobbes Thomas Hobbes speaks about legal sovereignty, and whereas Jean-Jacques Rousseau speaks about popular sovereignty, and whereas John Locke speaks about political sovereignty. Now let's explore what this concept means. What's political sovereignty? And what's popular sovereignty and what's legal sovereignty mean. A popular sovereignty is just nothing but when sovereignty resides in the people of the state. It's called as a popular sovereignty. It resides in the people of the state. This theory was expounded by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, when later became the slogan of the French Revolution. The doctrine of popular sovereignty regards the people as the supreme authority, as the people who decide right or wrong. People are not bound by any natural or divine law. Government exists only as the tool for the good of the people. It should be held directly responsible to the people. It can exercise authority only on the basis of the law of land. Will of the people should not be ignored. Popular sovereignty is the base of modern democratic system. Legal sovereignty is just nothing. The sovereign is supposed to be absolute and omnipotent. It functions according to its own law. Law is simply the will of the sovereign. There is none to question its validity. Legal sovereignty grants right to its citizens, and there can be no right against him. It means right of citizens depend on the will of legal sovereign, and anytime he can take away. Legal sovereign has, among others, characteristics such as he is always defined and determinate, and he may reside either in one person or in the body of persons, and it is definitely organized and precise and known to law. The third concept is political sovereignty, which refers to the sovereignty of the people that's exercised by the parliament, that the elected representative on behalf of the people of the state. Right? So in this concept, in his concept of political authority arrived at after the social contract was not the king, absolute or delegated, but the people themselves. Rousseau called his sovereign general will. What was that general will? The superstar of the general will is the people. Does it mean that the whole population of the state? No. The answer must be emphatic now, because Rousseau limited himself used two terms, the general will and the will of all. The general will is the best in the will of all. So the general will must be the filtered cream of the will of all. Thus, common interest or welfare interest of the people is the general will. We may say with certainty that enlightened public opinion of a state is the general will of Rousseau. He called it will for the general good. In practice, however, it may mean the majority opinion of the people. As we read Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, we find three interpretations of the social contract theory. Hobbes' contract is one which the people unconditionally surrender their right to the monarch who is bound to become a despot. In Locke's case, the people conditionally delegate their power to the king and make the ruler accountable to them. Thus, Locke supported limited monarchy in England. Rousseau is most radical in enthroning the people and making the people themselves the ruler. Hobbes stands for legal sovereignty, Locke supports political sovereignty, Rousseau supports popular sovereignty. According to Rousseau, the essential ingredient of social contract was the general will to which the individual agreed to subject themselves. The people sovereign was the embodiment of the general will. The experience of this naive place Geneva in Switzerland might have influenced Rousseau in taking this position. Either Jean-Jacques Rousseau or Thomas Hobbes or John Locke concept of social contracts approach towards the emergence of the state is first from certain limitation, and therefore the critic maintain, among others, the following argument against the social contract theory. In the first place, the theory is not borne out by the historical record. It has no historical basis. It's not known to history that any social contract was made. But in both cases, the state existed there before it was said to be created, or at least the people had some knowledge of the state and the government before it were created, or the contract was made. This example do not establish that primitive people who had no knowledge of the state could establish the state by contract. In second place, Sir Henry Manning attacked the theory as one of the putting the cart before the horse, because contract is not the beginning of society, but the end of it. That the universally accepted view is that the society has moved from state of nature to contract and not vice versa. With the growth of the age, state lost its rigor of fixity and its place was taken by contractual obligation. It presupposes political consciousness in the state of nature prior to the establishment of the state. How can one have the idea of the good of the state when he has not experienced the state? In the third place, there cannot be any right, even if it's natural right, without the state. Right follows from the womb of the state. Without an established civil society, there cannot be any right. It does not follow from logic that the people had a bundle of rights before the creation of the state. In the fourth place, it's a fact in history that the state came into existence as a result of a long process of growth and development. Sociologists have established that the state is created by a long term of process of social development, kinship, force, divine sanction, family, various other known and unknown factors are there behind the growth of the state. Modern social scientists and historians are of the view that men are by nature social animals. They never lived in a pre-social or pre-governmental state of nature. The state is never a consciousness created in institution, but a development like a family. So critics maintain that the state should not be reduced to the position of partnership agreement in a trade of pepper or coffee or calico or tobacco or what have you, or some such low concern to be taken up for a little temporal interest and to be dissolved by the fancy of the parties. It's to be looked up with reverence, with respect. It's a partnership in all sciences, a partnership in all arts, a partnership between those who are living and those who are yet to be born. In the fifth place, the theory is dangerously wrong. By certifying the state to be a handiwork of human being, the error is that the state is never a creation of man, but is an independent social institution. The theory carries with it the element of revolution by giving too much importance to man as even the creator of the state. The truth is that the government and not the state is the creation of man. But it has also its own value or strong side. Value is the social contract. Although, as an explanation of the origin of the state, the social contract is unacceptable, it has some merit or value. First, the theory dashed to the ground the more worthless theory that the state was the creation of God. There might not be any social contract anywhere in history, but it carried the message of the supremacy of the people in the statecraft and gave encouragement to the growth of democracy and gave a deterrent to the arbitrariness of any government. The second merit of this theory is that it helped the growth of the modern concept of sovereignty. It therefore said that the legal sovereignty is the direct outcome of Thomas Hobbes' concept of Leviathan. The third benefit of the social contract theory is that John Locke answered some of the most critical questions by clearly distinguishing the state from government. The fourth fruit from the social contract theory is the concept of popular sovereignty as expounded by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So much so that Rousseau's social contract inspired several peoples in the world to overthrow the despised ruler. A fifth strength of this social contract theory of the state is the theory of consent was a constitutional experiment in several countries. The next 2 centuries, this theory ignites three mighty and revolutionaries. First, in 1688 in England, called the Glorious Revolution. Second, 1776 in America, called the War of American Independence, and so forth. An English Revolution in 1688 proclaimed that the government is accountable to people, and if the government goes astray, the people can overthrow it and establish a new one. The Declaration of Independence, the 4th of July 1776, announced that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. The diction used in the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen during the French Revolution is the end of all political association is the privation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. And these rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance of oppression. Thus, all these three big political experiments emphasize on the element of the consent of the people are a factor to reckon with the governance of the country. So in the political thought of Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, may be found a theoretical consideration of the practical issues that were to be confronted the author of the American French Constitution. Right, the influence of the theory of social contract, especially as that relates to the issue of natural rights and the proper function of the government, affected the constitution making of the revolutionary era that began with the War of American Independence and was enshrined in the great political manifesto of the time, namely the Declaration of the American Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the French Declaration of the Right of Man and Citizens. The constitutional experiment of those countries had great influence on the liberal thoughts in Europe and other parts of the world during the 19th century. The last approach towards the origin of the state is the Marxist approach towards the origin of the state. The Marxists are of the view that the state is a creation by the class struggle with the help of force. So it's altogether a different theory of the origin of the state with the recognition of force which we have studied at the theory of origin of the state. The Marxists began with a primitive society where there was no surplus wealth to quarrel with, and so there was no state. With the passing of time, society was getting split over hostile classes with a conflicting interest. This class antagonism was the root cause of the state. When agriculture was learned as an art of culture, there was ample food which resulted in private property. The insoluble contradiction as a result of division of labor became so acute that it was not possible for any class to keep reconciled in the state or to keep the quarreling class under control. The most dominant class that controlled the mode of production came to establish the state to ensure it is dominant over the other class who didn't own the mode of production. The state that became an instrument of domination and oppression of one class over the other class. Thus, the state came in to ensure the right of the dominant class to exploit the other class. As the dominant class kept on changing hands, so also changing the character of the state was not imposed from outside, but it was a product of society's internal development at a certain stage of development. Emphasizing the economic factor as the key element of the class struggle, Friedrich Engels maintained that, but in order that this antagonist class, let's quote it, but in order that this antagonist class with conflicting economic interests might not consume themselves in society in sterilized struggle. A power standing above society became necessary for the purpose of moderating the conflict, of keeping it within the bond of order, and this power, arising out of society but placing itself above it and increasingly alienating itself from it, is the state. So the state was the medium of the economically dominant class. That's it. Lenin developed on the above thesis by bringing Communist Party as the dominant class, namely the proletariat, and its state, namely the USSR, where the proletariat was the dominant class, which was to exploit the other class. Lenin also emphasized on the element of force to be restored by the proletariat against the bourgeois. Thus, the Lenin incorporated the element of force in the creation of the state. The Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci made a little departure from the Marxist tenet by stating that state is creation of the political party that holds on power. According to him, the political party is the modern prince. Evidently using the expression of the Machiavelli, he went to the extent of asserting that the party represents the national popular collective will and aims at realization of higher and total form of modern civilization. Here we find the author is more agreement with the German idealist Hegel and than Marxist. This is in broad analysis of the Marxist view as picked from the writings and opinion of Friedrich Engels, Lenin, and Gramsci. Now we shall draw up the criticism of the Marxist theory as the origin of the state. The Marxist theory of the origin of the state, as based on the class struggle, is subject to the following criticism. In the first place, it's nowhere stated in the history that the state is origin of the state. In second place, there might be different class interests, but it is difficult to say that this class were at arms as the Marxists have also trying to get believed as. The class, on the other hand, cooperated with each other and contributed in their way in the composite development of the state. In third place, the Marxist theory is not original but secondary, because it carries the old wine of force theory in a new Marxist bottle. Force has been discarded as unsatisfactory theory in the creation of the state. In the fourth place, Lenin and Gramsci, by identifying the state with the political party, have erred by generalizing the communist state as an example for all other states. The communist state in Russia and China might have originated with the Communist Party. Russia and China were already there in the map of the world. They were not created with the Communist Party. Today, the Communist Party is over in Russia. Does it deny the statehood to Russia? The Marxist dogma that the state is a creation of the class and it will be die with the death of the class is false and misleading. The states are permanent and no state were withered away or destroyed by the oppressive force. In the first place, Marxism, by identifying the state with the party, encourages the totalitarianism of the worst type like fascism and Nazism, so the theory is dangerous. Though we fail to accept the Marxist theory as a suitable answer to the origin of the state, so what's the best approach to the emergence of the state? There is no simple and singular approach to the emergence of the state. Each theory plays an important role in the explanation of the emergence of the state.